Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and give you the essential insights. Today, we're plunging into, well, one of the most staggering financial deceptions in history, the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme. It's a story that's not just about the astonishing scale of the fraud, but about this man. This man with an almost perfect reputation who fooled nearly everyone. So our mission today is really to unpack the sources you shared with us. We want to pull out those crucial insights, the really surprising facts, and, the lasting impact of this huge fraud, all tailored for you.
That's absolutely right. We'll start by exploring Bernie Madoff's origins, which are actually quite unlikely when you look at them. Then we'll trace how his legitimate business, which was very successful, somehow developed into this massive fraud. We'll dig into the mechanics, how it actually worked, its eventual very dramatic collapse, and then, importantly, really consider the consequences, the fallout, and the lessons that are still relevant for the financial world today.
So the big question, right? How did a guy from humble beginnings who built a legitimate, highly respected firm, how did he end up creating this empire of lies that fooled so many people for such a long time? Okay, let's unpack this. Right, so Bernie Madoff. Bernard Lawrence Madoff, born in Brooklyn, New York back in 1938. His parents, Sylvia and Ralph Madoff, his dad was a plumber. A Jewish family background, grandparents, immigrants from Poland, Romania, Austria. He went to Far Rockaway High School, graduated 56, met his future wife, Ruth Alpern there, then college, a bit at University of Alabama, then Hofstra University, got a BA in political science in 1960, even did a short stint at Brooklyn Law School.
Yeah, and what's really amazing, I think, is how his legitimate firm started. Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, LLC, 1960.
Yeah.
He started it with just $5,000, money he'd saved up working as a lifeguard and installing sprinklers.
Yeah, lifeguard money.
Seriously. Plus, he got a $50,000 loan from his father-in-law, Saul Alpern, and his first office was basically just space in his father-in-law's accounting firm.
So this eventual giant of finance, later responsible for billions in fraud, literally started with savings from summer jobs and a family loan. That's quite something. And he built a real legitimate business from that.
Oh, absolutely. A very real one. His first business model, it was focused on making markets for penny stocks, the really cheap shares. In the over-the-counter market, he was a market maker. Basically, he'd be ready to buy or sell certain stocks, providing that liquidity that helps trading run smoothly. But the really key thing here, his visionary move, was using computer technology, way ahead of many others. A lot of firms were still doing things manually, but Madoff saw the potential in computers for trading, automation.
That gave him a big edge, right?
A huge edge. And interestingly, this early work in electronic trading actually helped lay the groundwork for NASDAQ. By the 1980s, his firm was handling over 5% of the entire trading volume on the New York Stock Exchange. Significant.
And see, that's why the later deception was so devastating. He wasn't some outsider. He had this deep trust, this flawless reputation built over decades. He was chairman of NASDAQ for 3 terms in the early 90s. Hugely respected. At its peak, his firm was the 6th largest market maker for S&P 500 stocks, had something like $300 million in assets. Which brings us to the really baffling part. How does someone like that, so legitimate, so embedded, pivot to fraud on such an epic scale?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe billion-dollar question here. According to the FBI, the Ponzi scheme actually started running parallel to his real business. And it started surprisingly early, possibly as far back as 1962.
62, wow.
Yeah. He was managing investments, apparently channeled through his father-in-law, Saul Alpern, and Alpern's partner, Frank Avellino, and the first investors. Just friends, associates, people from Queens, Long Island, the Catskills, his initial network. Now, the critical moment, it seems, came early on. He made a bad trade.
Yeah.
A really bad one. And he lost a lot of money that belonged to his father-in-law's friends, people who trusted him. Instead of admitting it, owning the loss, he covered it up. He faked trades, created false returns to hide the hole. There's a quote from FBI Supervisory Special Agent Paul Roberts. He put it plainly. He didn't want to own up. So he started covering it up. It just snowballed from there.
Snowballed is probably an understatement. So to keep this cover-up going, he invents this strategy, right? The split strike conversion. On paper, it sounded really sophisticated, maybe a bit complicated. He claimed it involved buying S&P 100 stocks and then using options, those contracts to buy or sell later, buying puts for downside protection, selling calls for income.
Exactly. It sounded technical, plausible, maybe even brilliant to those who didn't dig too deep. The complexity was part of the shield. But here's the catch. When academics later analyzed the returns he claimed to be making, they just didn't add up. His reported results were, and I quote, well outside their theoretical bounds. You simply couldn't get those numbers using the strategy he described.
Which raises that huge question again. If the numbers didn't make sense, why didn't regulators or these supposedly sophisticated investors catch on sooner?
Well, part of the answer is how he targeted people. He used what's called an affinity network. He leveraged his legitimate reputation, his standing, particularly within wealthy Jewish communities, New York City, Palm Beach especially.
Right, playing on shared connections and trust.
Exactly. And he cultivated this aura of exclusivity. He kept the investment side deliberately low profile, made it seem like a special club. If you could get in, you were lucky. That actually increased the allure.
And his client list grew to include some really big names, people like Steven Spielberg, Kevin Bacon, Kyra Sedgwick.
And major charities, too. It wasn't just famous individuals. That really shows the breadth of the trust he commanded.
Yeah, it really does.
And then, by the early 1990s, it wasn't just individuals anymore. The scale exploded because of feeder funds. These were big investment firms that basically acted as funnels, gathering money from all sorts of places, charities, universities, retirement accounts, individuals worldwide, and pouring it into Madoff's fund.
So that's how it went global.
Precisely. We're talking huge amounts. Fairfield Greenwich Advisors lost around $7.5 billion. Tremont Group, $3.3 billion. Bank Medici, $2.1 billion. Banco Santander, nearly $2.9 billion. These established, seemingly reputable channels spread the risk and the deception far and wide.
Okay, so how did he actually manage the deception day to day, keeping all those balls in the air?
Well, the mechanics involved a lot of smoke and mirrors, built on surprisingly simple foundations, but executed meticulously. A key figure was Frank DePascali. He started as an errand boy, apparently, but became central to creating all the fake paperwork.
Fake paperwork?
Oh, yeah. Sophisticated fake trade confirmations, account statements that looked completely real, even fake regulatory filings, made the whole thing look legitimate on paper. Other employees like Annette Bongiorno and Joanne Krupi were also involved in creating these fictitious records. It was quite an operation on the 17th floor, separate from the legitimate business.
And how did he explain the lack of actual trading evidence if regulators look?
Clever cover story. He claimed that during volatile market periods, he moved client funds into safe U.S. Treasury bills. So if regulators couldn't find proof of the massive stock and options trading his supposed strategy required, he'd just say, oh, we were in T-bills then. It bought him breathing room.
Right, and the whole thing just kept going as long as new money kept coming in.
Exactly. Classic Ponzi scheme structure. It absolutely depended on new investments exceeding the money being withdrawn. The fund's exclusive nature helped, as did the fact that many clients just reinvested their supposed returns instead of cashing out. Kept the cash flow positive for decades.
Decades, it's staggering. So what finally caused it all to collapse? The trigger. It was the 2008 financial crisis, wasn't it? The perfect storm.
Absolutely. Markets were tanking globally. Investors everywhere were scared, needed cash urgently. And ironically, many turned to their Madoff accounts, thinking that was their safest asset, the one place generating consistent returns.
The exact opposite of reality. So they started asking for their money back.
In droves.
Yeah.
In the weeks leading up to the end, Madoff was hit with redemption requests totaling around $7 billion.
$7 billion.
Yeah. And in that chaotic market environment of late 2008, finding new investors to pump in enough cash to cover those withdrawals, it just became impossible. The well was dry. The music stopped.
And that's when he confessed.
He had to. On December 10th, 2008, his sons, Mark and Andrew, confronted him. They were apparently concerned about paying out bonuses when the firm seemed stressed. He just came out with it, told them, I'm running a Ponzi scheme and we're out of money.
Wow. Imagine hearing that from your father.
Unthinkable. They did the right thing, immediately alerted the authorities. The very next day, December 11th, FBI agents showed up at his Manhattan penthouse. When they confronted him, he reportedly just said, there is no innocent explanation. I've been running a massive Ponzi scheme. He was arrested right then and there.
And the fallout, the human cost. It's easy to think of it as just impacting the super rich, but the reality was different, wasn't it?
Vastly different. That's a crucial point. The Madoff Victim Fund, the MVF, approved claims from over 42,000 petitioners. The total principal loss, around $7.6 billion. But here's the shocking statistic. Over 76% of those victims lost less than $100,000.
76%?
Yeah.
Less than 100,000?
Yes. This wasn't just hedge funds and billionaires. It wiped out the life savings of ordinary people, retirees, small family foundations, vital charities. We're talking about nearly 39,000 individuals, over 2,000 institutions, including hundreds of corporations and almost 900 charities, victims in 127 countries. The devastation was incredibly widespread and deeply personal for many.
It did. Mark Madoff, his older son, tragically took his own life exactly 2 years after his father's arrest, December 11th, 2010. Andrew Madoff, the other son, died from lymphoma in 2014. Bernie's brother, Peter, who worked with him, got a 10-year prison sentence.
And Bernie Madoff himself,
sentenced to 150 years in federal prison. He died there in April 2021 at age 82. Such a dark end to it all. So after this colossal failure, what happened? What changed in the financial system? The SEC must have been under immense pressure.
Oh, absolutely. The impact on the SEC was immediate and, frankly, embarrassing for them. The scandal laid bare huge failures in their oversight. Their own inspector general found the agency had enough information to investigate Madoff for a Ponzi scheme 16 years before he confessed.
16 years? They had hints for that long.
Sufficient information, according to their own internal review. Tips were missed, investigations weren't thorough enough, it was a massive systemic failure.
So what did they do? How did they reform things?
Well, there were significant internal shakeups. They restructured the enforcement division, creating specialized units to focus on specific types of fraud. They centralized how they handled tips and complaints. A huge problem in the Madoff case was information getting lost between different offices. They also beefed up investigation procedures and created a new Office of Market Intelligence, the OMI, specifically designed to better analyze tips and complaints.
Okay, so internal SEC changes. But were there broader legal changes too? New laws?
Yes, definitely. The Dodd-Frank Act, passed in 2010 while addressing the wider financial crisis, was certainly influenced by the Madoff debacle. One key area strengthened was the SEC's custody rule, Rule 206-4-2.
The custody rule. What does that do exactly? How does it prevent another Madoff?
Essentially, it requires investment advisors who manage client assets to use qualified custodians, like reputable banks or brokerage firms, to hold those assets independently. It also mandates annual surprise exams by independent accountants to verify the assets actually exist, and much stricter client notifications about where their money is held.
So trying to stop someone like Madoff from just controlling everything and faking the statements?
Exactly. Introduce independent checks and balances. Plus, they raised the threshold for SEC registration, shifting oversight of smaller advisors to state regulators so the SEC could focus its resources on the bigger players.
And the whole whistleblower situation. That was a huge part of the Madoff story, right? People, Harry Markopolos trying to warn the SEC for years.
A critical and frustrating part. Markopolos provided detailed, credible warnings repeatedly, but they just weren't adequately acted upon. It was astounding, really.
So did that lead to changes in how whistleblowers are treated?
Yes, thankfully. Post-Madoff, there's been a major push to strengthen whistleblower programs. The SEC whistleblower program was significantly expanded, offering potentially large monetary awards up to 30% of the money recovered. That's a big incentive.
Right, encouraging people to come forward.
Exactly. And the Department of Justice launched its own pilot program for corporate whistleblowers in 2024. There are also stronger protections against retaliation and much better systems, supposedly, for handling the complaints efficiently. It's fascinating, though, isn't it, how often it takes a massive crisis to force fundamental changes.
It really is. Well, on the positive side, fraud detection itself has gotten much more sophisticated since Madoff, right? Technology must play a big role now.
Oh, absolutely. The industry has poured resources into it. We're talking machine learning, AI.
How does that work in practice?
Well, AI can monitor transactions in real time, looking for suspicious patterns that humans might miss. Behavioral analytics can spot when activity deviates from normal patterns. There's predictive modeling to try and anticipate new fraud types, even natural language processing to scan communications and documents for red flags.
And I saw something about using this on blockchains now, too.
Yeah, researchers are using machine learning to detect Ponzi schemes on platforms like Ethereum, reportedly with really high accuracy, like over 94%. The tech is constantly evolving.
And alongside the tech, presumably the human side, the due diligence, has gotten tougher.
Definitely. Investment firms, pension funds, big investors, they're much more rigorous now, or at least they should be. There's way more scrutiny on strategies that promise those smooth, steady, high returns that Madoff offered, if it looks too good to be true.
It probably is, that old saying.
Pretty much.
Ugh.
There are also stronger demands for transparency from investment funds and better coordination between regulators across different countries. The system is stronger.
And what about the victims? Has much of the money actually been recovered?
Remarkably, yes, a significant amount. That Madoff Victim Fund, the MVF, finished its distributions in February 2024. It returned about $4.3 billion to over 40,000 victims globally. That works out to almost 94% recovery for those eligible claimants, which is actually quite high for this kind of fraud.
That's actually really good news amidst all this.
It is. And separately, the trustee managing the Madoff firm bankruptcy, Irving Picard, has recovered even more, over $14.7 billion, through lawsuits and settlements. So the recovery efforts have been pretty successful, all things considered.
And culturally, Madoff's name is just synonymous with Ponzi schemes now, isn't it? It's become a permanent fixture in financial education.
Absolutely. It's a staple case study in business schools and investor education materials, a constant reminder of the red flags, the dangers of blind trust, the importance of skepticism.
But even with all these improvements, the tech, the rules, the system isn't foolproof, is it? Experts still seem worried.
No, it's definitely not foolproof. Professor John Coffey at Columbia Law School made a good point.
Yeah.
The next crisis often comes from an unexpected direction, a blind spot. And he noted that the SEC's enforcement budget hasn't really kept pace with the sheer growth and complexity of the financial markets. Resources are still stretched thin.
And new risks keep emerging.
Exactly. Things like cryptocurrency and digital assets create whole new playgrounds for fraud. Complex derivatives are still hard to police. Cross-border transactions make things tricky. And AI, it's a double-edged sword. It helps detect fraud, but sophisticated criminals can potentially use it to perpetrate fraud too.
So it raises that question, are we actually prepared for the next big one, whatever form it takes?
That's the unsettling question, isn't it? Are we looking in the right places?
Well, looking back at Madoff's decades of deception, it certainly hammered home some core lessons, didn't it? The absolute need for strong oversight, for investors to be educated and skeptical, and for constant technological vigilance. So many of the reforms we talked about, how tips are handled, how assets are custodied, the focus on whistleblowers, you can trace them straight back to Madoff's fraud.
You absolutely can. And while the defenses are undeniably stronger today, no system can ever be completely immune, especially when you have a determined and sophisticated fraudster. The Madoff case remains this critical, stark reminder of how individual actions, maybe starting small like that initial cover-up, can spiral into something with massive systemic consequences affecting lives all around the world.
So as technology keeps racing ahead, as the world gets even more interconnected, what new kinds of financial deception might be brewing right now under our noses? And maybe more importantly, what can you, the listener, do to protect yourself, to spot those red flags that Bernie Madoff hid so masterfully for so long? Something to think about.